all-star panel this morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Sutherland. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory and Government Affairs with Citizens Energy Group. We have three panelists who know a lot about water. First, we have Jeff Willman, who is Vice President with Citizens for Water Operations. We have Ryan Mueller of DNR, Deputy Director, who happens to be on point for a lot of things, including the Governor's Water Task Force, correct? And then most of the water legislation in the legislature these days starts with Senator Cook in Senate Utilities. So with that, what we're going to do, these gentlemen are going to talk 10-ish minutes. Two of them have some slides. We're going to start with Jeff, then go to Ryan, and then go to Senator Cook. And that will leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. And since this group is so shy, I have some questions I could ask if you don't have it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. Green button advances.
And green button advances.
Yeah.
All right, I should be able to handle that. Thanks, Joe, and good morning. I'm Jeff Willman, Vice President of Water Operations for Citizens Energy Group, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. See if I can do this without screwing things up. I'm going to take just a few minutes and talk about our organization, Citizens, and then I'm going to get into the water side of our business, talk about who we serve, how do we go about building and managing the system, how do we plan for the future, and what is our perspective in terms of long-term supply for Central Indiana. Here on the slide, it talks about Citizens. We've been in existence since 1887, 138 years. We're a public charitable trust, kind of a unique structure. And over the years, our services we provide has really expanded. For about 100 years, we focused on natural gas and coke production. It's a byproduct of manufactured gas alone. And then in 2000, our services expanded. We acquired the district steam and chilled water systems that serve downtown Indianapolis, and which is, some people don't know, that steam system is the second largest in the United States next to Manhattan. And it's one of the fastest growing chilled water systems in the country as well. In 2011, our service menu expanded as well. We bought the water and wastewater systems from the city of Indianapolis, and those are the largest in the state. And then in 2014, we acquired the water and wastewater systems in Westfield, and those are a couple of the fastest growing utilities in our state as well. So a lot of change for our organization in the last 20 to 25 years. Topic for today is water. So we're going to focus on, where do we serve, how do we serve, and where do we stand in terms of our planning. The graph over on the right provides an illustration of our service territory. Most of our customers are in Marion County, but we expand and serve outside of parts of the other 8 counties as well. The blue represents our retail service areas. So those are the customers we produce the water, take it to their home, meter it, bill them directly, and then the red areas reflect the wholesale communities that we serve. So we take water to them in bulk. They take it on and serve their customers retail. So you'll see we got 8 wholesale customers. So you'll see Whitestown, Pittsboro, Brownsburg, Morgan County. Sometimes we provide all their water. Sometimes we provide part of their water. But overall, retail 355,000. We probably serve over 400,000 customers on a daily basis. We'll get into the configuration of our plant. 10 water production facilities, both surface and groundwater. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. But in terms of overall capacity at the bottom here, 256 million gallons a day. That's kind of you'll hear that over and over. MGD is our capacity. On an average day, we'll use half of that, if that. But when it gets really hot and dry, that'll increase, and we'll peak primarily due to lawn irrigation in this region, and we'll get up in the 230 range. So we've got an ample capacity even on peak right now, but we continue to build and expand the system. And I will say, In terms of water use, the biggest challenge we have in central Indiana is automatic lawn irrigation. If I could show you some profiles, what happens on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesdays between 2 and 6 o'clock, it's eye-opening. Okay, where's our water come from? Slide here illustrates there's two different sources of water for utility. It is surface water or groundwater. And for us, over on the left, illustrates our surface water system. And we use water from three primary streams: Eagle Creek, White River, and Fall Creek. We have treatment plants on each one of those streams, and we have reservoirs that support each one of those streams when it gets hot and dry and the flows drop in those water bodies. And so the biggest takeaway here is 75% of our water supply comes from surface water. Okay, it's our biggest supply. It has been for ever, and will continue to be going forward. Over on the right, 25% of our supply comes from groundwater, and we have 10 well fields that are to the north and to the south, typically aligned along the rivers. There's connectivity between these aquifers and the rivers. 80 plus high capacity wells, 25% of our supply. The one thing that makes us different, there's 20 utilities that serve central Indiana. That map I showed you earlier, all of them use groundwater. Typically, all of them use groundwater exclusively. We're different in that we use groundwater, and our primary source is surface water. And so we have a regional system that really enables us to move surface water into parts of the region that doesn't have groundwater. So you've seen that, and that's why we have some of the wholesale customers that we do. Okay, how do we plan for the system? We acquired the system from the city of Indianapolis in 2011, like August. And within 6 months, we're in a severe drought in 2012. And it was maybe one of the more challenging things we went through, but it was probably the best thing that ever happened to us. We learned right away, early, what are the limitations of the systems that we acquired, where do we need to focus, how do we need to plan, and we became very, very committed to long-term planning as a result of that. So our planning process is illustrated over here on the left. It's integrated water resource planning, and it is 50 years. We have a perpetual 50-year plan we update every year. Quite frankly, we update it about every other month, quite frankly. And what we do, we plan for those drought conditions. Moderate droughts that occur about once in every 20 years. And so we plan for those when it's hot and dry and those loads are high. And we project that out at a kind of a growth rate that we believe is kind of projects where we're going to be. And then we add a 10% reserve margin. So that black line to projection, 10% reserve to red. And our goal is to plan projects on out for 50 years to be able to meet that demand profile. Now, how do we identify the projects that we're going to implement? We look at every project that we can imagine in terms of opportunities to supply our customers. New surface water, new groundwater, new reservoirs, a variety of things, long-haul pipelines, they're all in the list. But what we do is take, how much is this going to cost? How much water can we get out of this? What's the cost effectiveness? How much the cost on a dollar per gallon or cost per MGD basis? We rank those, and then we implement the lowest cost plans. So this is an illustration of the plans that are going to be implemented over the next 50 years. And over to the right, if you look at this planning process and rewound it 10 years, these are some projects you would have found in our plan 10 years ago. So Citizens Reservoir, we added a new reservoir to the system, the first one within 50 years since Morse, since the 50s. And 3.2 billion gallons, did it in a unique kind of creative way, converted a limestone quarry to a water reservoir, bulk water supply. We also implemented some intakes, strategic intakes downstream, down toward the downtown area. The first one is the White River to Canal intake, which is not far from here, 30th Street down by the Armory. There's an intake that can move 70 million gallons a day from the White River to the canal, and the canal feeds our largest plant. If you can see behind that chair there's another one on Fall Creek to Canal, where Fall Creek and the Aqueduct pass. We move 40 million40 MGD from the Fall Creek to the canal as well. So effectively, what we've done in the last 10 years, we've added bulk water supply to the system, and we put intakes that allow us to move water between streams, and allows us to put water when and where we need it. We have much more control than than the system we inherited back in 2011. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the Citizens Reservoir. Again, first reservoir since Morse, and we knew this was going to have a lot of value, a lot of benefit, but it's exceeded our expectations in a variety of ways. And I'll talk about how we use it, but I'll tell you kind of how it's configured first. So this is Geist Reservoir. You see over on the left, and you see up in the right-hand corner, it looks like a little pond next to Geist. It's 90 acres, and it happens to be 240 feet deep, so it holds 3.2 billion gallons of water. Geist is 1,500 acres, and it's got half the water in that little pond that's in the entire reservoir, over 50%. And we engineered it, configured it. Basically, when Geist has more water than it needs, it's going over the spillway downstream, we'll peel off 100 million gallons and fill that quarry up. And then when we need it, like we were today, we're moving 20 million gallons a day out of that quarry down into Geist, moving it downstream and moving it with those intakes. So, and then that's just some configuration of how we did it from an engineering standpoint. That building down there is a pump station, and there's tunnels that have been bored at the bottom of these quarries as well. But the most important thing is what's at the bottom. You have two options as a water utility to create storage, and storage is like gold when it comes to water utilities. It's what you use when it gets hot and dry in the peak side. You can create a traditional reservoir, like Geist Reservoir, or you can do something unique, like we did the quarry conversion. And if we tried to go out and build Geist again, it would be almost impossible. We'd need 2,000 to 3,000 acres. It would cost well over $1 billion. It would take, if you could, it'd take 15 to 20 years, and you'd get beat up by every stakeholder you can imagine in the process. But in what we did with this quarry conversion, 90 acres, all in, property conversion, 30 million. Got it done in 5 years, could have done it in 3, but we just kind of spread it out a little bit. And we had full support from all the environmental groups. So in the bottom line here, you can create storage through these quarry conversions for 5 cents on the dollar compared to a traditional reservoir. So they're great value. This is part of the future for this region in terms of the solutions. I'll keep moving here if I can. Okay. All right. Has any of this helped? Well, I would say, you look at surface water systems, and one way you can tell how they're doing is to look at them in the summer. It's hot and dry, you're using some of your storage. What are the levels of the reservoirs? What are you seeing? And so Morris and Geist here. This is a history before the improvements that we put in place, 88 through 2012. You would see these reservoirs drawn down 10 feet, 6 feet. I mean, totals over there, 13, 16, 11, 7, 8, dramatic, dry, lake beds type thing. Since we made these improvements, they're down a few inches each year. Morris is full, Geist is down about 6 inches right now. And it's all by design. And we're moving water from the quarry into Geist, moving it down. But anyway, this is an illustration of that we have a much better system than we had in 2011. And what we're really working toward is building a drought-proof system. What we've gone from at-risk to stable and drought-resistant. And we're keep marching toward drought-proof that could withstand a 1940-41 drought. Okay. You get questions. Where's the water going to come from in the future? We're tapped out here in central Indiana. What are we going to do? Well, there's still significant water available in the White River. 5 miles from here, I could take you and show you 150 million gallons of water that's available for us. So in the White River, illustrated over here on the left, it flows from Anderson down through Noblesville and through Marion County and down through Martinsville. And it's a gaining stream. It gets bigger as it flows to the south. It's the nature of the water. All the tributaries hit it. But there's some other things going on that make water available as well. So the graph over the right kind of illustrates the flow. Look at the bottom of Noblesville, downtown I-465 Martinsville. And it shows the natural flow of the White River in Noblesville is maybe 50 million gallons per day. But by the time it gets into down by Martinsville, it's 150. Now, it's even higher than that because we're adding water from our Belmont and Southport treatment plant that make it up to about 300 million. So the water flow in the White River increases by a multiple of 5 between Noblesville and Martinsville. Okay, there's a lot of water available. And then we have all of our storage that we can release when we need it in Orange. And we do that very strategically. When we do that, we don't release that at all as much, but it's available for us. And so the thing to keep in mind, we've only used water north of downtown. We've never gone south. So look where all the water is available, and hasn't been used yet. Our plans are going to take us further down the White River to utilize that water supply as well. Okay. And finally, we try to simplify this a little bit in terms of way to think about water supply for Central Indiana, and we boil it down to this: water supply planning is local. Affordable water supply planning is local. Moving water a great distance is expensive. So if you, within 25 miles radius of Monument Circle, we have all the resources we need for the next 100 to 150 years for this region, if we're smart about how we plan and how we engineer and implement it. We just talked about the abundance of surface water is just 5 miles south of us. There's more groundwater that hasn't been utilized. The reservoirs, I could show you 20 quarries that sit within this footprint that can be utilized for water supply. And then you have water recycle. Once you use this water, you treat it, you put it back in, and it's available as well. So we see a bright future for water supply for Central Indiana, and we're very happy about the interest that the state has shown in terms of planning as well, and really support Ryan's efforts to come up with a statewide plan. Okay.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning. Thank you, Jeff. My name is Ryan Miller. I'm Deputy Director at the Department of Natural Resources, and a lot of my remarks, Jeff's talk really has set them up nicely. But if you've ever heard me talk, you know I always ask the really bad dad joke right off the bat. So what letter of the alphabet holds the most water? The C. Duh. Thank you. All right, my daughter will be proud. All right. Thank you very much. Oops. Okay. So back in April of 25, Governor Braun signed the statewide water inventory and management plan executive order. Has anyone heard of this, or are you familiar with this at all? Okay, very good. So when we were talking about this plan, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I always like to start with some guiding principles and really what the intent of the executive order was, and then we'll move into the directives or the actual action items. And so really you've heard Jeff mention the 2012 drought several times. I was actually in Missouri at that time, and I think for many Midwestern states, that 2012 drought really served as maybe crisis moment is too strong of a word, but definitely a wake-up call with intensified water uses and increased demands from a variety of water use sectors. So it's really spawned the series of contemporary water planning, not only in Indiana, but throughout the Midwestern United States and other places. And so this executive order is really intended to build on the Water Infrastructure Task Force back in 2018, which was really kind of led by the utilities at that point, obviously, with the infrastructure needs. And then through the funding of the Indiana Finance Authority regional studies, the Central Indiana Water Study, which was completed back in 2020, I know provided and complemented a lot of the data and information that Jeff just shared. this executive order also focuses on regional needs throughout the state, recognizing that Northeast Indiana is much different than Southwest Indiana. There's going to be different concerns, different priorities from the water users, not only the utilities, but ag users, industry, commercial users, domestic users, all of the water rights holders within these different areas. And so we really need to recognize those regional differences and have a customizable approach, if you will, to this planning framework. Supported by accepted data and scientific practices, I always like to say, good data leads to good science, leads to good decision making. So those data sources that were part of the question, that's one of the issues that is specifically pointed out in this executive order is how do we prioritize new sources of data where gaps exist or new monitoring networks. And finally, it works within existing statutory authorities. I know Senator Cook will talk a little bit about new legislation that was passed this past session, but the intent of this study is really to focus on what the state currently has as their existing regulatory framework and authorities for planning. And finally, it's a transparent process for stakeholder input. Well, Jeff definitely mentioned a lot of, the expertise that the utilities had. There's lots of other expertise in the other water sectors as well. And so it's going to bring in all of those water users within these different planning regions. So our directives, I already touched on it. The first one is just kind of like the water basics, the water 101. Understanding how much we use within a region, understanding what those 50-year water demand forecasts look like. So what is our current use? What is our future use? Lining those up with what's available in both surface water and groundwater sources, especially during those times of shortage, that drought period that Jeff talked about. And then when you look at that picture, you can see where these hot spots may occur within this larger basin. And then that naturally allows the water users within the basin to kind of coalesce around how do we solve these problems? What solutions can we propose? What are our priorities as water users within the basin? So that's the first step of the water inventory. The second is developing I'll call it an organizational tool or a statewide planning framework. So what does the map of Indiana look like? How do we break this down? And what makes sense as a logical planning unit? Who should be on a part of a planning committee? In my mind, again, the water users within the region are really driving what the priorities are. While this is a kind of a statewide led effort, it's not a top-down mandate. This very much has to be driven by the water users within each region. The third is developing recommendations for enhancing the existing water monitoring network. So this is, again, very basic. We can't manage what we don't measure type of saying. So understanding how groundwater levels change not only seasonally, but if an intensified groundwater use would come into play. The same with surface water. And you hear a lot about stream gauges and groundwater observation wells, but we also need to know weather and climate patterns because that really drives a lot of the discussion about availability as well. Thankfully, we have a couple recent studies that identified gaps in our water data management networks. That we're starting some initial conversations with partners on where these new monitoring stations could provide the most benefit for a multitude of reasons. So you think about flood forecasting, you think about understanding drought, you think about recreational uses like can I go paddling on the White River today? Is it too low? Is it too high? All of the understanding of groundwater for the various uses and uses within these aquifer settings. And then finally is to create take these data and provide beneficial applications or a way for users to see kind of on a real-time basis what the conditions are. So a state of the region, a state of the aquifer. There are lots of good data sources out there through the state, through the U.S. Geological Survey, through utilities, through ag users, but it's not really brought together. And I will say with this directive, I think this almost comes last because until we fully understand the management goals within these planning regions, it may be a little bit premature to stand up these publicly accessible networks. So I'll give you an example of each. So this is the water inventory study, Directive 1. The good news is we do have funding for this through the Finance Authority. They've been very generous. And we have a scope that we are using that is standard so that throughout the state we can look at each one of these water study regions. The green ones have been completed, the blue ones are in progress, and actually that pink one in Northeast is also in progress now. But we can actually have some comparative metrics between water availability, water use in different regions of the state. So this effort is intended to be done by the end of August of 26, and then we'll develop this into an overall statewide summary of all of these various water regions. Again, this really provides the information for more detailed discussion within these planning regions, which is directive number 2. So how do we break up? This is not Indiana, just so you know, this is Oklahoma. But in Oklahoma, who's been pretty sophisticated in their water planning because of things like oil and shale gas development, drivers beyond just drought, they go through a 5-year planning process. And one of the most difficult things they did was come up with this map, because there's so many different ways you can carve up a state into planning regions. They chose to follow watershed boundaries in this case, but other states like Texas incorporate political boundaries along with aquifer boundaries, along with surface water boundaries. And so one of the areas of input that we'll be asking for through this process is, what does this map look like? How should this look for Indiana? And I see us being the department initially just putting out about 5 to 10 straw man maps. You know, this could be a map right here. It makes sense. It's on planning regions, right? And there's been several that have been introduced during the Water Infrastructure Task Force. So we're really not reinventing anything new, but they need to make sense to reflect, again, the regional water use, the regional hydrology, and the priorities of the users. And so once this map is agreed upon, then we have to start thinking about, well, who sits in and talks about water within these regions? And in my mind, again, I always gravitate towards the water users, to the water rights holders within the code. Definitely the state, academic institutions, and others will serve in an advisory capacity, but really these discussions are going to be led by the folks within these regions. Again, you know, the utilities are in the water business, so they're going to bring a wealth of expertise along with the farmers who know their conditions on the ground. They see it daily, so it's going to be a discussion where you bring all of these different users together. I mentioned all sectors will be represented, at least that would be how I would do it. And then finally, the priorities and the strategies are developed at the regional level to reflect the unique challenges within each region. So you talk about data, believe it or not, these are rock stars right here. This is, I mean, you know, get your lighters out or your cameras. So we've got mesonet stations. I know that both Purdue and IU are very active in monitoring weather and climate for a variety of different purposes. We've got stream gauges. We've got groundwater observation wells throughout the state. We have more needs, and so part of this project is to put together recommendations that rank out or prioritize where we need new sites. So if you, again, I go back to, this is a pretty fundamental investment in the management of Indiana's water resources. And finally, an online data platform. This is just an example that I threw out where there was a clear management goal. So this is the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. Provides water supply to tens of millions of people, has a lot of very sensitive streams, a lot of really great trout streams if you're into fishing in this area. This was back when the shale gas boom kicked off back in the, I think, 2010s through 2020s. And industry actually came to the Susquehanna River Basin Commission and said, we need regulatory certainty. We would like to fund a tool so we can understand when we can withdraw from these streams to make our production happen. And so what came up with was this online data platform, real time, where citizens could log in and say, okay, today I'm blue. That means I can pump my full allocation from this stream. where then maybe Ryan down here, mine's red, well, I have to idle production today, and that's all based on some criteria of stream flow. So here's an example of a management goal with an online data platform that has a direct benefit and application to an end user. This is my last slide. So this goes back to 2012, kind of where we all started. You see those really warm colors. That's bad. That real dark red. Those are exceptional drought periods. And so what we really, Jeff and I were talking before, we're kind of in an area of good timing where there seems to be a lot of interest, a lot of optimism around this executive order. I've had literally dozens of conversations with folks. And the next step is to take this out to the external stakeholders, seek input on these directives, and then finalize this before the end of 2026. Knock on wood, we won't have anything like this during this process. It's always better to plan when you're not in crisis mode. So thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm Eric Cook. As most of you know, I serve a 5-county area in south central Indiana. That's Orange, Lawrence, Brown, Jackson counties, and the southern portion of Monroe County, including Lake Monroe, which kind of ties into my remarks. My first encounter with water as a legislative policy issue was in my first or second term as a young House member, when a guy named Bert Servais proposed a high-volume water pipeline to pump water from Lake Monroe in my district to serve the city of Indianapolis. Needless to say, I got a few calls. Now, at the same time, I thought a lot of Dr. Servais. You remember him. He was a very smart guy, very successful guy, very forward-thinking guy. He loved the city of Indianapolis. He wanted to make sure his town had water when it was needed. And I thought to myself, if Bert Servais is thinking about water, maybe I need to be thinking about water. And while that pipeline was never built, it was probably what engaged me as a legislator in the issue of water. Fast forward then a few years into the early 2010s, there was a group of legislators who shared an interest in water. That included Senator Charbonneau, Representative Soliday, and others in both the House and the Senate. And so we began to have some conversations. We began engaging with stakeholders. And the first thing we realized, we didn't have data. And how do we get that data to begin thinking about policy? And we had, I forget whose idea it was, but well, we need some monitoring wells. Maybe if we had some monitoring wells around the state, we could begin accumulating some meaningful data. Well, we couldn't get an appropriation for that. Now, think about that. I'm looking out at Katrina. You know where I'm headed. We ended up in a partnership with the Indiana Farm Bureau, using volunteers to put monitoring wells on their property. And Katrina, thank you. I think maybe that program may still be going on to some degree, maybe not.
It sounds like we need to rev it back up.
Well, maybe. Well, I don't know. When Ryan showed that, when Ryan showed his monitoring wells, it looked like NASA. It looked like Cape Canaveral. I'm remembering.
That's what a mess it is.
So there are 60 of those volunteer monitoring wells still being operated today.
All right.
We've actually been able to add a couple because of the popularity of the program.
That's so good to hear. So from humble beginnings came some really good data collection. So through that and other sources, the data began to develop, and we began to convene task forces, surface water task force, groundwater task force, wastewater task force, through the 2010s, building upon that data with expert testimony. Which brings us to the 2025 session of the Indiana General Assembly, which I've been asked to speak a little bit about tonight. I would be remiss if I didn't, however, go back in time to the 2024 session. One of the signature bills was Senate Bill 4, dealing with lead service line replacement issues. Very significant bill. Majority agenda bills, of which that was one, generally don't get a lot of bipartisan support, let alone bipartisan sponsorship, but in that case we had both, and it was nearly unanimous. And from all the reports I get, Jeff, from particularly citizens and others that are using that legislation, we are increasing health and saving lives as a result of that. So thank you and others for doing that. So Senate Bill 4 from 2025 was, as you know, an effort to address the concern raised by high-volume interbasin transfers of water. It's an issue that emerged in 2024 over the LEAP district, where there was significant concern in Tippecanoe and surrounding counties that the Wabash River would be drawn down to serve the LEAP district. In what I thought was a great moment of leadership and something I've never seen before. We had a governor, the pro tem, and the speaker go together to that community and listen and give their word that that would not happen without legislative oversight. And that gave us some time to address the issue in a very thoughtful manner rather than a reactive manner. And that became Senate Bill 4 of this past session. Senator Bray asked me to look at the issue. I'd frankly already been looking at the issue, and he thought it would be a good agenda bill. And it, again, like Senate Bill 4 the year before, had very strong bipartisan support, as it should. In thinking about it, I relied heavily on the IFA water studies that were referenced earlier by Ryan. They are not done yet, but I felt like I had enough information to draw some conclusions. It also convinced me that we need to write the bill around natural watersheds rather than arbitrary lines such as county lines. We tend to think a little bit natural in county lines, city and municipal boundaries. But as I read those studies, it became evident to me, instead we needed to think about what God designed, which were natural watersheds and basins. So Senate Bill 4, now Senate Enrolled Act 4, as you know, actually requires a DNR permit for new interbasin transfers. Okay. Now there are some exceptions. There are some carve-outs. One is the Great Lakes Compact area. One is the Citizen System, which already exists, and it crosses already, I think, Joe, three basins. And then the existing agreement between Citizens and Lebanon to supply water to LEAP. Now, that got a little bit misunderstood during session. There were people saying, well, LEAP is exempted. That is not true. LEAP is not exempted. That agreement is in place, and future water to LEAP would be covered by the bill. Then we also require anyone building a long-haul pipeline, whether it's interbasin or intrabasin, to get a CPCN from the IURC. So it gets two looks, and there's a statutory list of criteria. The DNR look is the environmental look. You know, what would this do to other people's water? What would this do to water quality and supply? The IURC's look is more from the ratepayer look and the public interest standard. What does this do to ratepayers? What's the impact on other water users? And so it gets really two sets of eyes. So that bill is now law, and we're getting very good feedback on it, and I hope it's an example of something that we can do more of. You know, I talked about the bipartisan nature of these bills. Water, of all the utility issues, does seem to be less partisan than some other utility issues. I don't know why. I'm glad, because it shouldn't be a partisan issue, but we really forge support across party lines when we work on water issues. I'm going to pivot now a little bit to talk about a few other bills that went into effect this session. I mentioned non-jurisdictional water utilities in my district. We have many. Statewide, there are just under 1,000 non-jurisdictional water and wastewater utilities. And what I mean by non-jurisdictional, they're not rate regulated by the IURC. Some are very well run, some maybe not. Their size might astound you. The IURC's latest number estimates the median number of customers for a water utility in Indiana is 730 customers. 730 customers. That's not a lot of scale. and lack of scale can cause some real problems. So with that background, Representative Pressel brought Senate Bill 1459 that I carried it in the Senate, requires water and wastewater utilities who are not jurisdictional to submit on a 4-year cycle information regarding their asset management program. And that's their long-term planning that Jeff talked about. Every year, every few months, you're looking at 50 years, okay? Smaller scale for these guys. But we asked them to file those with the IURC for IURC review. Now, that's not regulation, that's review. But it does have really a 3 strikes framework that we had set up in wastewater some years ago with regard to item enforcement actions. You know, your first one, you get some coaching. The second one, you get some regulation. The third one, you get a receivership. Okay, so we set up a similar 3 strikes process for the asset management plan with not the idea to be punitive, but the idea, to be helpful and have some coaching there in the interests of their ratepayers. And so part of that, and I think we put this in the Senate, I said, to be fair to these folks, and a lot of them are, these board members, a lot of them are nearly volunteers, some of them are making $50 to $100 a month. So part of that, if we're going to hold them to a higher standard, then let's give them some help. So the bill does include language that the commission will host annual training for water and wastewater board members to help provide sort of a continuing education for those directors. So there will be some support there for those directors who often don't have the resources to find that somewhere else. Senate Bill 426, which was mine, we added water utilities that are non-jurisdictional to the 3 strikes law that we had created for wastewater, and that deals with item enforcement action. We also created a government standards defense for liability protection for water utilities who are supplying water that meets applicable standards under federal or state law. We also had language there that continued an effort that we started about 10 years ago to give more options for small water utilities to partner or to merge with other water utilities. And so 426 had some language that gave the commission some additional tools to consider and authorize mechanisms for those consolidations to occur. We're seeing that. I think we're going to see more of that as time goes on. And then finally, Senator Niemeyer brought Senate Bill 459, and this is a cybersecurity bill. It requires water utilities with 500 or more customers who are using computerized monitoring equipment to notify the state IoT, that's our Indiana Office of Technology, if they suffer a cybersecurity incident impacting operations within 24 hours or 2 business days if there's no operational impact. It also requires them to conduct a cybersecurity vulnerability assessment at least once every 4 years and submit that to IoT every 2 years. And so I think Senator Niemeyer is very forward-looking with all that is going on in the world. We are so interconnected and so vulnerable, but I think that's a good idea to require those assessments. So that's, in a nutshell, was the water activity of the 2025 General Assembly. And thank you for the invitation to be here today and for your continuing support of what we do.
That's a lot of information in very little time. We've taken most of the grace period between this and lunch. If there's a quick question, Abdul.
Data centers. How do data centers fit into this whole Indiana water consumption supply related issue? Because Franklin Township, it's on for water, fire, data, you name it.
Well, I mean, the data centers are another water user. They'd be considered an industrial or a commercial use, so there's right to a beneficial use. It just determines, it would come down to how much water they use within the system and is there any impact. And I don't know if we know the answers to that question as of yet.
Bill, sometimes in our lives we've seen technology solve technological problems. And I was out at NREL in Denver a year ago, National Renewable Energy Lab, and there and other places, there's some really exciting research around the chips. And so that over time, I think we're going to see chips that use less water and less electricity than today's chips. So keep your fingers crossed. That could be part of the solution.
And I can follow up too. I know that there are different technologies that data centers consider to use air for cooling, to recirculate water so that their water use is greatly reduced from maybe 1 million+ gallons a day down to under 100,000 gallons a day. So there are technologies out there to consider.
I'm just shocked that that question got asked. We will be around. People are yelling at me and waving at me. So thanks to your panel.
I've got a new list on SMCC, so I'm ready. Yeah, thank you.
Jeff,
Appreciate
you
it.
did a great job setting the stage. Yeah, really well done. Thank you.
Yeah.